nature and content of media has changed. And this is primarily on account of changes brought in both by technology as also changes in the economy itself. In the first instance, the definition of news has changed. Conventionally, when we read our newspapers in the morning, we were all told that the news has to be accurately reported. The reporters or the newspaper's viewpoint on news is not relevant. And the conventional saying was that the news is sacrosanct, it's the editorial page which belongs to the editor. He can express his views there. But then, with the advent of 24/7 television, particularly the camera, changed the definition of news. At this transient stage, the definition of news is what camera can capture. What camera cannot capture ceased to be news. It had no value for television. And therefore, what was sensational, what was exciting, what could help the TRPs itself was news. The camera in particular had a wicked character. It loved bad news. So if there was a great harvest, it was no news. If it was a normal monsoon, it was no news. If there was no human tragedy, it was no news. But if it was crime, it was controversy, it was corruption, it was floods, it was earthquakes, it was famine, the camera always preferred to show something which was more destructive because that was out of the ordinary. And therefore, news channels started concentrating on crime, corruption, controversies. Probably cricket and cinema were the only two sober TRP generating things that they could show. And we thought that to look for accurate news, we had to go to the newspapers in the morning. But those who picked up the newspapers next morning had seen most of the news several times over the previous evening. So newspaper reporters then started going in for not reporting accurately what had happened, but really the story around the news. And this transient phase has continued till in the last few years I am now finding, and we are in that next stage of transition where the digital medium is taking over. And the digital medium is going to perhaps impact it more than what the television medium impacted on news. The impact of technology now is that almost by the minute you get to know what has been happening. You have flashes on your iPads and on your smartphones which inform you almost in real time the developments as they take place. And therefore, what you watch on television, whenever you get the time to watch television, that news is also no longer fresh news because you've already come across headlines or even detailed news on the digital medium itself. And slowly the impact of this is going to be on the economy of the medium because the size of the cake is limited. And therefore, advertisement revenue is going to be shared between all these mediums, with the FM radio now bringing back the relevance of radio itself. For once we had thought at some stage that radio was a dying medium. But FM, particularly the languages in the FM, and once the fourth round of auctions take place and you have hundreds and hundreds of cities where FM channels in their own regional languages are going to be there, that's going to have an equal share of the advertisement revenue. So it's newspapers, television, digital medium, the radio, which are all going to now share its share the revenue, and therefore the financial pressure on each of these mediums is going to increase. How does it impact on the viewer? I've already said that it's leading to a change of habits. I found that after the advent of 24/7, the time I spent on newspapers was a reduced timing. Today I read my newspapers on the iPad or on the smartphone at night before I go to sleep. Because a very large part of the news is already loaded onto the sites of various newspapers by late evening. And therefore, rather than disturb my busy schedule in the morning with newspapers, just before I go to sleep after dinner, I've started reading my evening newspapers. And those are exactly the newspapers which I have to otherwise read in the morning. There are cities in the world which have abandoned published newspapers. The largest newspaper groups have informed me that their circulations are certainly not growing. The circulations are dipping. Magazine journalism is facing the most severe challenge after all these mediums. Some of the best known magazines in the world have closed down and gone over into the digital mode. And therefore, these are the changes which technology is bringing about. What is a stakeholder's view on this? And I think it's a huge empowerment of all sections which is taking place. The stakeholders, and I consider myself as a participant in public life as a stakeholder, it's brought a huge change as far as our dealings with the medium of newspapers and channels is concerned. The 2014 election, I'll just give 3 illustrations. All 3 are personal, but they illustrate a larger point. How do we communicate with the media? Of course, you have press conferences and you have various other speeches which media will cover. In the month of August 2013, I decided till the last vote was cast to write a Facebook blog every morning. It took me about 10 minutes to dictate it, another 4 to 5 minutes to correct it. And with 15 minutes effort, it was loaded onto the Facebook. As times passed by, in weeks and months, others started reposting the same post, those who were our political associates and friends. I continued this from August till the day of the polling, till the last ballot was cast. And an estimate was made that it was being posted to 15 million people every day, which is probably bigger than the size of the biggest newspapers. You don't have to chase newspapers and news channels to report what you have said. They would pick up whatever they wanted to pick up. There'll be people who will be writing against you. There'll be people who will be writing for you. And you could participate in the debate itself or lay down the agenda from your point of view using the new medium which has been made available. The second illustration. Traditionally, we were upset if something which was wholly incorrect was said. You had to ring up dozens of editors and reporters and explain your point of view. Today, we don't bother to do that. Your counter viewpoint is simply posted onto the social media. A debate starts. And your viewpoint in due course and in due course in this case means minutes and hours and not days, is picked up across the media with equal importance. It is as though you are running your own newspaper without investing a rupee in it. That is the empowerment of the stakeholders which has taken place. How it can be effectively used for a positive purpose, I have one illustration. In the initial months of the government, I had the additional responsibility of the Ministry of Defence. In the Kashmir Valley, 4 young men tried to allegedly break an army barrier. There was a confrontation and 2 of them died and 2 were seriously injured. The news had not appeared in the media as yet. But from the valley, some people posted that this is an unfair incident which has taken place onto the social media. I was immediately informed about it by somebody who picked it up on the social media. And as a defense minister, I spoke to the Chief of the Army Staff. He had also not heard about it. So the social media informed us prior to the army setup informing its chief. He found out and he gave an explanation which the local units must have given to him. I wasn't exactly convinced with the rationale of the explanation, and it seemed that the death of the 2 young men was unfair. By this time, the news had started breaking out. And one impact of such a news of this kind that takes place is that it acts as a trigger for the separatists to foment trouble, because it gives them an opportunity to campaign against the Indian state. Look, some young people have been unfairly killed. Within minutes of the incident, I put a small post and a tweet regretting the incident as the defense minister. This was probably the first time that the government of India, within minutes of the incident, regretted something that had happened. The next morning, the army commander went to the residence of the victims. The army offered them compensation. Now, instead of there being huge protests, it created another reaction. There was anger, of course, that this is the first time that the state has acted with a sense of responsibility. Ordinarily, I would have come to know after a day. It would have taken some more time for the inquiries to be held. On day 3, we would have expressed our reaction. By this time, hell would have broken loose. But the capacity of the social media to inform us even before the army could inform its chief, even before the reporters could put it out on the news channels, is a fact that stakeholders today are able to utilize this change which has taken place, much to the advantage of each one of the larger public interest itself.